Welcome to GlobalPolicyCast, a podcast which opens the inner workings of international governance through conversations with those who have shaped policy from insight to impact. Hosted by Insights International with its co-founder Arpit Chaturvedi and Suresh Kumar, a career civil servant with nearly 40 years of implementing policy on the ground. Global ideas, real governance. Welcome to Global PolicyCast.
It is not every day that one gets to sit with a former head of state. In today's episode of Global Policy Cast, Mr. Suresh Kumar and I sit down with Dr. Ameenah Gurib-Fakim, the sixth president of Mauritius and a biodiversity scientist, a professor. She was the recipient of the 2007 L'Oreal UNESCO Prize for Women in Science. Today we are discussing her journey of how she became the president from being a scientist, and a lot about governance, climate change, and the future of African continent as well as the world. Hello and welcome to Global Policy Cast. Today we are with a very special guest, Dr. Ameenah Gurib-Fakim, who was the first female president of Mauritius. Dr. Ameenah Gurib-Fakim, thank you so much for joining us. Absolutely an honor and a pleasure to have you in the first episode of our podcast. First, let me get the benefit of understanding more about your very inspirational journey and specifically asking that what motivated you from being a scientist to joining public service and politics?
Thank you so much, Arpit. And of course, thank you for having me on your podcast. You know, I very often get asked about my journey because it really is an eclectic one, right?
Yeah.
And I was never destined for politics because nowadays you find that your name matters for joining politics. I didn't have that. I come from a very, very small village in my country of Mauritius where I grew up. And growing up in the era of a colonized Mauritius was not easy. And just to make a small anecdotic kind of remark, every day I used to go home and say to my father, who is this queen we used to sing to every day? Right?
Yeah.
And so this is the kind of environment I grew up. But I went to a Catholic school. You know, I'm Muslim by faith.
Yeah.
And I went to a Catholic school all my life. And my parents never saw any incongruity in this. And the village I grew up in, I consider it to be the microcosm of the world. Why I say this? Because just to give you an idea of a day in the life of Ameenah as a child, I would wake up in the morning, I will go to the madrasa, I will learn the Quran, I will learn to speak Urdu, I will learn Arabic. Then I would come home, I don my school uniform, and I go to a Catholic school, and I will go to Mass. The only thing I couldn't do, of course, I couldn't take the Eucharist. And then in the afternoon, I would go to my Hindu friends who are, of course, next door, and I would listen to all the stories of the Ramayana. I left to go to university, then I realized celebrating Diwali, celebrating Eid, celebrating New Year, Christmas, all these were second nature to me. So I grew up in that environment, and then I went to a school, and the teachers there infected me with the virus of science by being able to answer all the questions I had in a very, 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 very simple manner. And that caught my attention because they showed that science can be transformational. So then I ended up in a career in science. And at the end, because I was very passionate about chemistry, I ended up with a PhD in chemistry, and I still didn't know what to do with that because in Mauritius, there was hardly any kind of opening, but I was passionate and I followed my heart. I was all set up to go to the United States, just like most talented Indian would do, go to the United States for a postdoc. I got my green card, I got my position, I came home for a holiday, and my mother said, why are you going to go back again? You know, you have been away for so long. So I took up a position in University of Mauritius, and I was still looking for that chemistry, which I couldn't find anywhere because the infrastructure wasn't there. Then I fell in the pot of medicinal plants, just like obliques. You know, once you are in it, you can't get out.
Yes.
And then I did a whole career in organic chemistry. Then at the end, I ended up being the first woman professor in my university, and I became the deputy chancellor. Yes.
That bit we didn't know, that you were also the first woman professor in the university. Okay.
That's right. I became the first woman professor. And then at the end, when my tenure of vice president ended, deputy vice chancellor, as we call it, I decided to translate my research work into an enterprise. So I became an entrepreneur. I took my
Oh,
research work and made it into a business. I was very happily minding my own business, and the political world knocked on my door. And I said, why not? If I can serve my country at the highest level,
yeah.
I'll take the opportunity. I'll make the sacrifice, and it paid off. So I became the first female president of my country.
Oh, wonderful. I mean, thank you for that journey. Before I hand it over to Mr. Suresh Kura, I'm just curious to know that what was this business about? I can totally relate to the going to the Catholic school bit because that's really what happened with me as well. Grew up in a Hindu family and would go to a Catholic school in Firozan and
Exactly.
would find no contradiction in doing so.
Absolutely.
But
Yeah.
entrepreneurship, very interested to know that usually PhDs don't do that. So,
Well, that's interesting because I didn't have the ecosystem at the time.
yeah.
When the US, you go to Science Park, you have venture capital, you have angel funding. There was none of that. I got the L'Oreal UNESCO Prize for Women in Science in 2007. And then I met a French person who had already set up a business in Mauritius.
Yeah.
And his business was to do clinical trials on cosmetic products at the time because there was no legal framework.
Oh, okay.
So he said to me, why don't you join us? Because you can bring in the holding, you can bring in the research component. Because at the end of the day, be it pharma, be it cosmetic, be it even what we call now fortified foods, they all
Yeah.
depend, of course, they all go back to nature. So I said, okay, let's go and do it. So I took leave of absence from my university and I said, okay, I will incorporate my business, which I did. And then eventually the business started doing well. And I said, okay, now I'll retire. So I did. I retired and nobody could stop me retiring. And the idea was to use a database on herbal medicine and generate innovative molecules for industry.
Oh,
And
wow.
as I had, a company was already working with L'Oreal, with many of the big
Oh,
cosmetic companies to do the phase 4 clinical trial. So
yeah.
I joined, and that's what I tried to do, providing innovative molecules from the local biodiversity, which remains a biodiversity hotspot in the world. So the chances of developing new innovative molecules were quite high. And that's what I did.
Amazing.
Yes.
And we will get into the subject of biodiversity a bit later, but over to Mr. Suresh Kumar.
Thank you, Arpit.
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Ameenah. It's good to know about you. And when you were giving your profile, I was reminded of our own president, Dr. Kalam. He rose from a
Yes.
rural background. He was a scientist, and he became the president of India. Just to brief you, I am a career bureaucrat. I've been in government for over 40 years, and now peacefully retired and living a peaceful life, generally working on governance and policy matters. So when I think of you, I am reminded of Dr. Kalam because I've had a couple of interactions with him, and he will always speak of policies to be correct, and policies are not going correct, and he was a worried man. Maybe you also had some kind of experience when you were from 2015 to 2018, when you were president of Mauritius, maybe you also had some experience of working with the career bureaucrats, career politicians, and then the process of policy making. But what you see today is the policy making used to be a function of bureaucrats in the back rooms, and policymakers, the political executives used to say and do whatever they have to do with the policy. But from the back rooms of bureaucracy, the policy has now come on the center stage. It is more in public imagination. It is more in public discourse than what we used to see in the government. In my 4 decades in government, policy was never so hotly debated and discussed in public discourse than what we see today. Why is it that the public policy making has become so visible today? I'm sure you must have had some experience with dealing with the bureaucrats and career politicians in your country, and you may be able to throw some light why public policy making is so visible today, why everybody, more importantly, the youngsters, the youngster of as young as 25 years is talking of public policy. Maybe he doesn't know how to define the public policy, but he's talking about it. He's opting for, more people are opting for career in public policy than opting for career in business administration, opting for career in public administration. All those things are changing and changing too fast, maybe with the onset of technology, maybe with the onset of new data science, maybe the change of media, the way the media has proliferated. Probably that has changed the total discourse on policy making. So, what are your views? Why public policy is more hotly debated, discussed, and visible today than ever before?
Before I answer your question directly, I've had the privilege first of having met President Abdul Kalam. He's a fantastic, beautiful mind coming out of India, and he had such lucidity in whatever he was discussing. And he also had the knack of making things extremely simple for people to understand.
Yeah.
Now, I've had the privilege, the second point, of having sat on both benches. The bench of a scientist, where you try to see the world through, of course, rose-tinted spectacles, and you think that with one policy you can change the world. And then I also sat on the other side of the bench, where I realized that we are not really speaking to the politicians as we should. And very often they don't understand, right? And if an academic says, oh, we're going to present this great paper to the policymaker, they will read, they will understand. They don't read. A, because they don't have time. B, they are not trained to read scientific data. They can't. So what we'll have to keep on doing is making the document as short as possible, as layman as possible. But more importantly, we have to say to these politicians what's in it for them. I'll just give you a very small example. Politicians always want to be re-elected, right? Yep. The career, the thinking process is limited to the 5 or 4 or 6 year or whatever year cycle. That is the thinking that they have. So you're going to have to tease out for them something that will catch their attention. So why I should be doing this? Because at the end of the day, it will shine on me. At the end of the day, that's what it's all about. And so we'll have to be able to address the messaging in such a way is they will retain their attention, and they will also be tempted to read whatever we're trying to produce. But the language has to be completely different. And I think this is where communication matters so much. Why are young people being made aware of all these? Because social media has made democratized access to information. They are much more aware of what's going on. But where the failings are is that while we enact such brilliant policies, they don't see it happen on the ground, right? I'll just give you one small example, which is rife across the world. Inequality. Let's look at most countries. Let's look at a country like the United States, for example. Then we come to emerging countries like India and China and all the rest of it. Increasingly, America is no longer being referred to as a democracy. They are being referred to as a plutocracy. We are talking about oligopoly, increasingly being associated with these countries. Why? It's because the 10 or whatever it is number of people at the very top, they own most of the resources, 50% or more of the resources, which most common people strive to get. They don't actually they can't access medical service. They can't access, in America, in a country like America, you're talking about food stamps. Yep. Over 45 million people have access to food stamp. So they can see the discrepancy between the enacted policy of precisely wanting to change the world and what is not happening. And I think this is one of the reasons we're seeing this Gen Z revolt across the world, because they're not seeing their dreams, their aspiration, their future being taken care of by the present generation of politicians who are at the helm, because they don't have the vision to think 20, 50 years. They only think in the cycle of 5, 6 years. So there is a breach, there is a gap, and this is where increasingly they feel they can transform their own livelihood by taking the law in their hands. So how to be able to do this, how to communicate, how to transform these policies into reality on the ground. I mean, this is something that we have to tackle at the level of the policymakers, because they don't see it happening.
That's very well said, Dr. Ameenah. But before I come to that gap in meeting the aspirations of the youth, the more important experience I have had in Indian context is that invariably the politicians in power, politicians holding or occupying the space in the government were not willing to see the evidence, were not willing to see the data analysis, were not willing to go by what data or science suggested to them as a policy. And they were wanting to go by the political ideologies, political announcements, political commitments, which may or may not meet the aspirations of the youth or the generations. So what is your experience, whether policies in Mauritius when you were in power, when you were in office, were evidence-based? Were the politicians willing to concede whatever data suggested or science suggested?
Again, it's the same scenario. They're all focused on the short-term gains, right? And whatever short-term gains they can actually jockey upon, they will grab to this and run with that. Just to give you an idea, when we were talking about, for example, the climate issue, because I went to Paris for the very first successful COP, and what they could run with this is that we have an opportunity of investing in renewables. So that was something they would run with because they could see.
We can't hear you. I think there is some issue.
Yeah, I think there was a bit of a freeze over there.
Maybe some connectivity issue.
Yeah. You are able to hear me, sir?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
Maybe she is disconnected.
Yeah. Yeah. Got dropped, so should be joining again.
Sorry, I lost you there.
Sorry, yeah, we lost you for a bit. Yeah.
So it's the same thing. As I said, it doesn't change. And it seems to be getting worse, actually. And I don't know. I'm just being a realist here. And I'm very realistic about this situation. But something has to break. Something has to change. But I honestly don't know where that change will come from.
But only time I saw the politicians respecting scientists and expertise and experts was during the pandemic, COVID-19. COVID-19, the people saw a lot of value in whatever was being suggested and whatever was being projected to them as per the data. And most of the politicians and particularly the heads of the states and the prime ministers and the chief ministers, they all seem to be very happy with the experts. And I wrote a piece then called Politics of Expertise. And that was a time when scientists and experts were able to prove that what they suggest, they mean it, and that needs to be believed. And what was the condition in Mauritius? Did the politicians in power at that time during pandemic kind of respected the inputs and feedbacks and suggestions and recommendations of scientists and the doctors particularly?
Yes, we did have exactly the same scenario because I think we were in a crisis. But there's one thing here I would add is that there are certain situations where people really listen to the policymakers, listen to the politicians, listen to the messaging coming out of government. Again, it's down to a crisis. Like we have cyclones in Mauritius, and for example, then when there is a cyclone coming, the protocol has been established and people stick to that protocol. And those who don't stick to it, of course, will get fined for whatever infraction they will actually make to the existing protocol. So the conditions are such that when there's a crisis, then it's only then that we really want people to, that politicians are listened to. But having said that, we are living in a crisis right now. We're living in a crisis of the climate crisis, and nobody seems to care. And again, here, I will bring it down to communication. When you listen to a scientist communicating on the climate crisis, they are speaking to themselves. And I plead guilty. I do my mea culpa because at some point I was like that. So you tend to speak to yourself. You tend to think that people understand. They don't. They don't appreciate the language that scientists, the language that academicians come up with. So we're going to have to improve the communication. But having said this, the climate crisis is not something that can be handled locally. It has to be done at the multilateral system, which unfortunately is crumbling right now.
But don't you think, Dr. Ameenah, that the politicians in power listen to bureaucracy and, for that matter, even experts and scientists only when they get into extreme difficulty or extreme crisis?
Because it's their future which is at stake again. It comes back to the same thing. It's all about them.
So it's only when they feel challenged and they feel threatened, probably they listen to the officers. But at the same
That's
time,
right.
when they get into trouble and then they face the wrath of the public and common man, when the common man comes on the roads and agitations, they also blame the bureaucracy more than anybody
No,
else.
then they will
So
say that they weren't advised properly.
okay. Arpit, over to
Yeah,
you.
I mean, I was just reflecting on what Dr. Gurib-Fakim was saying, and I think that even there's a distinction in the kind of crisis. Like when I think about so something probably like a COVID-19 or a cyclone, a lot of politicians would pay a lot of attention to. But let's say air pollution in New Delhi, we see that, and there are often students or people on the street protesting it. But that is a problem that I have personally been seeing for at least a decade, and nobody has been able to, despite all of the evidence, the political groups have not been able to remedy it. So I think the more silent crises, just like the climate change crisis that Dr. Gurib-Fakim mentioned, those are the ones in which somehow the coordination problem does not get solved at the political level. At least for now, we haven't figured that out.
Arpit, for the health, for example, in India,
Yeah.
I have seen improvement in some parts of India. So it
Yeah.
also boils down to the leadership. If
Yeah.
the leadership is enlightened, they will definitely do something to change it. Whether they will move faster, for example, with the adoption of LNG, whether they will go to electric cars. I've seen that, for example, in Mumbai when I visited recently. The
Yeah.
quality of the air has improved. So the leadership at the helm of the state or the region matters. So it boils down to
Absolutely.
this as well. So if it's enlightened leadership, I'm sure things can happen on the ground.
But Dr. Ameenah, I think my take is that when I have dealt with politicians at all level, national level, provincial level, and my take is when the problem or the threat is so grave and it is immediate, politicians probably tend to take action. They tend to go by expert advices. They tend to take possible measures to save the population, save themselves also. But when the problem of pollution, problem of air pollution in Delhi, and the
Also,
problem of water pollution, which is bugging us in our country and maybe in your country as well, the slow issues, the issues which are the even problem of climate change, the things are which are not so visible, the threat is not so immediate or not so
yeah,
challenging or not so grave, the
well,
politician tend to
it's
ignore.
immediacy. It's the immediacy of the crisis. If
Yeah.
it's
Immediacy of
immediate and immediate
very.
results, then they will happen. Yeah. They don't see the long
I guess
term
another
because,
question, Dr.
again,
Ameenah, yeah, you raised another question of leadership. So leadership is not what it used to be. Leadership is not something you are a born leader. Leadership is not something about charisma. Leadership, I think, the imperatives of leadership have changed. The authenticity of leadership needs to be examined. People tend to believe only those leaders who are not really visionary, but leaders who can convert their vision into an action and they could show some results for the benefit of the common man, for the benefit of their population, their constituents. Now, the question is the changing imperatives of leadership. Maybe due to the technology, maybe due to the requirements of data science, maybe more evidence available to the common man through social media and media proliferation. These changing imperatives of leadership, do you think politics is changing because the imperatives are changing?
leadership is not a beauty contest. That much I
Correct.
can tell you.
I do agree. Well said.
You really have to you have to believe in what you're doing, but unfortunately, there are too many vested interests, and eventually, what happens is the personal or party or whatever vested interests come into the fold, and there it just distracts from the vision that person might have had. And having said this, you still have some green shoots where the leadership, by virtue of the leadership, but then again, it's also linked to what we call that our democratic system. A democratic system, we have the one person, one vote, 5-year cycle, and the personal attributes that they can benefit by the sheer fact they occupy a certain position. makes that much more attractive because they know that 5 years they'll go down the line, they will go and they'll have a very happy life after with whatever they have accumulated. So this is, again, one of the downside of democracy. And when we talk about the governance, we talk about the leadership, we have to ask the fundamental question: is democracy really working for everyone? Because to me, personally, the democratic process is not only the ability to go and cast a vote. For me, when you have meritocracy at work, when everyone can have access to education, when everyone can have access to healthcare, when everyone can have access to social safety net equally, that is, to me, the fundamentals of democracy. And yet we're not seeing that anymore. We're being described as being a democracy by the sheer virtue that we can just cast a vote in the ballot box. It's not enough. So these are things that we really have to look at as a society. And it comes at the grassroots level, moving up. It will never be top down, because top down, it benefits the system, the acro system as it is. So we really have to question our governance itself. Where do we want to go? What kind of society we want to build? And with what means as well? Because if we are going to have entrenched inequality, we will never be able to deliver on what I have just said. And there'll be no social safety net to begin with until we start paying our taxes. And it is precisely those people who have the means, they get away with not paying any taxes. So how do you make the system work? This will come with a revolution.
Again, coming back to the question of leadership, the way I have seen it, today's leaders in civil services, leaders in the politics, leaders in science and technology, what are you required to do? You need to integrate science, society, markets, and diplomacy. This is what the new global order, the new global paradigm of growth requires. How do you integrate science, society, markets, and diplomacy to get to the results where you think everybody has an equal and equitable rights and equitable kind of endowment of resources, which is not seen to be happening despite claims on democracy, a successful democracy, a continued successful democracy. So do you think the leadership, both in the civil services, in politics, and maybe in experts in science and technology, is the leadership moving in that direction, taking all stakeholders, all segments, all factors of the growth together and trying to achieve something better for future, which is more sustainable, which is more durable?
I'll just take one example right close to home. To me, it's Kenya. Kenya had been able to make unbanked people access finance. And they've been doing that even well before Apple Pay. They started with M-Pesa. So there has been a leadership at some point that would transform the lives. And as we speak, 80% of the GDP of Kenya goes through M-Pesa. That's huge. That's huge. So it can be because it has made people access finance when they didn't have the credentials to open a bank account, for example. So this is one example. And if you look at now to integrate, for example, science in societal attribute. We look at, for example, the sector of agriculture, and India has been a great advocate. You started the Green Revolution, and this, of course, was down. It started with late Professor Swaminathan. So he managed to actually bring in the science to make it work for the people so that people can have 3 meals a day or at least 2 meals a day by virtue of productivity on the ground. So these are solid examples where a leadership coming from one quarter, and of course we have seen Professor Abdul Kalam bringing in indigenous technology to make precisely space access to the space sector possible. And he started that with indigenous technology, which is something to be proud of. So it's patchy, it's happening, but it's happening sectorally. It's not happening maybe at the level of the political world, but these actions make politicians pause and think, because they can see what is happening on the ground. They can see, for example, in Kenya, that poor people with their mobile phone, they can access money, their livelihood have been improved. They can ask questions because they have access to data. So things are happening slowly, but maybe not enough to the satisfaction of the mass. But there are green shoots coming. So I should not really be negative about these issues, because things are happening slowly. And as I said, the democratization of information, young people accessing that also will be a game changer, because they can see that their livelihoods, what they are living every day, is not at all what's been happening in China. And I think these people saw that when TikTok was being banned in the United States. They started getting on the red note, and they start saying, oh, this is not what we have been told about what China is all about. So, this is what is making, this will be the make and break moment, I think, when it comes to that kind of narrative that we want to change.
Yeah.
But one issue you refer to governance, the quality of governance, from good governance to strong governance, everybody has been talking about. But one of the major issues in governance, both the political leadership as well as the leadership in science and technology and civil services, is that non-transparent way of doing the government business. If I'm never hesitant to talk about and mention about corruption in governance. Yeah, corruption it could be governance of corporate sector, it could be governance of a country, it could be governance of a small business, it could be any. But the non-transparent actions, like what you saw in Gen Z's agitation in Nepal and Kathmandu, people were basically, the youngsters and the youth was basically agitating against the corruption in the government. Now, these non-transparent actions of the leadership, these are often questions by the next generation, the aspirational generation, the youth of the country. What's your experience? What's your take on, particularly with reference to Mauritius?
There is one word we have to increasingly bring to the conversation, is accountability. I mean,
Right.
where is the accountability? That's something that we have to drive into the psyche of the people around here. But that also comes back to another important issue, which is, of course, the building of our institutions, because politicians will come and go, and it is the institution that will stay, and it is through the institution that we can make change happen. But unfortunately, when politicians see a strong institution, they tend to actually weather it down, the strength. But this is where the pushback must come. The pushback must come, be it at the level of judiciary, be it at the level of many institutions which are being put up precisely to address, for example, corruption, and also indicators across the world. When indicators are not right, people have to question and ask, demand accountability as to, for example, let's say Mauritius has gone down in transparency index. Why is this happening? Where are the points where we are weak and where we have to address? So people have to watch out for these indicators and question the leadership of the day.
I agree. That's a good point that, we expect. And I think empathy, accountability, and transparency in governance, particularly at the top level, is something which can make things better. But one of the things post-globalization, one of the things expected from the global paradigm of growth was that this privatization, the offshore business, the new value chain, new way of doing business will bring in transparency and probably reduce corruption and kind of speed up the growth and development. People thought that kind of a growth will trickle down and the poverty will go down. Do you think that seems to be happening? Is it in your
Trickle-down
country?
economics has never worked. Trickle-down economics has never worked. What we'll have to go back to is Keynesian, really, theories of making sure, we talk about less government and more governance, but I think we need both. We need both government and governance.
Yeah.
And government enacts the laws, and governance can actually follow up when issues are wrong. But I think we need, when people are poor, how do you address poverty? You need to feed them. This is the basic, what even in India, we talk about increasingly roti kapra makan.
Yeah.
Basics, right?
Yeah.
That's what we have to address all the time. So we need government. When things are not right, we need government to step in, but government has to demand accountability, and heads have to roll when they have to roll. But where the trust is eroded is when, we saw that very much in the financial crisis. In some countries, head did roll, but in other countries, they became advisors to the president. So people asking the question, what's going on here, right? So we need to, this is something that is building up. And I think the young people are realizing that, it's their future at stake. And unfortunately, we saw recently, you've spoken about Nepal. We saw that a couple of months ago in Madagascar. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
They want access to a better life, and they know that the better life will come through the government, through the process we call democracy, whatever we used to call it, governance, whatever. But they know that it has to come from the government, it has to come from policymakers. It comes back to the politicians, and they will demand accountability.
Yeah.
And so it is through this.
You agree, so
Yeah.
Dr. Ameenah, you agree that the GDP-led growth, GDP-reflected growth, or GDP-led growth may not then be the solution.
I don't know whether GDP is the only one. GDP is very extractive. I mean, the way we have been looking at GDP, I mean, there must be other index. I think Bhutan has got a good one, the happiness index. So there are many, many indicators we can. But for me, growing up in Mauritius, we saw that some of the major decisions which were taken immediately after independence have been critical for the emergence of our economy. And there were three of them initially. We had free healthcare, we had a modicum of social safety net, and we also had a control on the population growth. But right now, we are thinking about it because we are getting an aged population. But the major break came in 1976 when education became free for all. And this is where we saw, of course, gender complementarity, not gender equality, because we could educate both the boys and the girls. And in our culture, we always feel that we have to educate the boy because they become an economic safeguard for our older people. It's not the case at all nowadays. And so a parent didn't have to make choices. They could educate both girls and boys. And from then on, because we had a trained human capital, limited training, of course, gradually it grew up. So we found that every 10 years, we could add a pillar to the economy. But this is by virtue of the trade human capital. So these are things that we have to look at the level of society. What do we want? What kind of future do we want for our kids? And I think also there is in many countries a ministry for planning, economic planning. My mantra is that if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So we need to have a minimum of planning so that, all businesses, they have a strategy, they have a planning, they know where to invest the money. So at the level of the government, it has to be the same thing. Where do we want to go? What kind of plan do we have for the next 25 years? Where do we see ourselves? And then use this as a guiding post to actually direct the society as to where we should be going. But of course, there'll be, many factors which will change the course of things, but there has to be a direction where we want to see the country go. And it comes, of course, with good planning. Of course, we're bringing in and also bringing innovative ideas. I mean, can you imagine a country like South Korea, a very agriculture, textile-based industry, wanted to invest in steel? People thought they were completely mad. But investment in steel eventually gave rise to Hyundai, gave rise to LG, gave rise to all these electronics which came further down the line. So you need that thinking process to be able to make a dent in the way people think, and also try to be as inclusive as possible, bring in as many young people as possible, because we don't have all the ideas. There's generational gap. And nowadays, if you look at how agile they are with technology, we should be able to tap into this. So we should be providing these young people with a quality education, education that makes them learn by doing. And we have to do away with all the rote learning, because AI is here. So we have to be aware of the challenges are coming in our societies and how prepared we are, how education is preparing our young people. And I think one country is doing that so well as well, with barring all the competition and all the rest of it, is Singapore. They have taken the bull by the horn. They have really looked at the education sector very well, because they know that these are the lower hanging fruits that politicians precisely can hang on to and make things happen at certain level.
Dr. Ameenah, you are in a sense agreeing that direction, the planning, and the actions you're talking about will have to definitely reflect on the context in which they have to be taken. It may not, you may not fit all. In that situation, context-specific policies and program will remain always important. Be that whether you follow the GDP-led model of growth, or whether you follow happiness index, or you follow any model or any indicator of growth, you need to give greater importance, greater thrust on the context. You need to respond to the local aspirations, local expectations of the people. Over to you, Arpit.
Yeah, actually, I was very intrigued by the... sorry.
No, there is no one size fits all.
No,
there is no way. Very well said. Thank you.
Absolutely. I was very intrigued by the South Korea example that you gave because in development there are two types of thinking. One type of thinking is that okay, look at what resources you have and then build your economy out from there. And the other is that okay, look at what value chains are going to be important going forward in the future. I mean, despite being having been invested in steel, South Korea is not the biggest steel producer in the world, but they had the vision. So now what we see, for example, is that I particularly admire the fact that India has gotten into semiconductors, despite the fact that at this point of time, India does not really have an edge in that market, but it's trying to find some place in that value chain. So, do you think that the development mindset should be more realistic that, okay, this is what we have? Let's say if some country is an agricultural country, then say that, okay, let's do agrotech, let's just develop on agriculture, or they should be like, okay, what's going to be the next big thing? If it's going to be computer science, let's just focus on that. So,
When I was looking at the emergence of economies in Africa, all right?
yeah,
And we found that in the 1960s, immediately after independence, there was growth happening, right? And then something happened. 1970s, all of a sudden, there is no growth. The economies are getting more and more dependent on multilateral organization. So I was thinking, what's going on there? The mantra that had been developed in the Western world, for example, of protectionism was used. I mean, one of the great preachers of this was Alexander Hamilton in the United States. I mean, he was the one who actually said, we're going to protect fledgling economies and make things happen until they become good enough to be subjected to the entire force of the economy. What happened in Africa is that these countries, the fledgling economies, they were being forced, the mantra of the Washington Consensus, to expose the economies right at the very beginning to the market force. And what happened? They couldn't cope. They couldn't cope. So what we have to do, I mean, India has been a good example now it's getting a very big economy, very soon the third biggest economy. Having said this, there's a caveat. Third biggest economy, yes, but we need to also to look at per capita.
for sure.
Distribution has to matter. I'd much rather be living in the 20th ranking country in the world, but where there has been a bigger distribution and the quality of life and aspiration of the people, the lifespan and all the rest of it that goes with it is better. So this is something that has to be looked at.
Absolutely.
But having said this, India has made massive progress, and you have a huge human capital, and you have a huge diaspora. I think the time is right, especially when I see a lot of discussion on the H-1B visa, to get brain circulation, people from Silicon Valley coming in, nurturing and mentoring, being the role model. We have so many big CEOs. I mean, this is my dream, of course, if we're not applied to. There's so many big intellectuals operating right across the world of Indian stock. Why isn't there a kind of a system that will allow them to come and spend time in India and then go back? I'm a realist. I will not say that we're going to look at brain gain. I know this brain drain is happening, but I have coined this term of brain circulation.
Absolutely.
Let them come, let some time, and then look at this mass of gray matter that you have outside. Sit down with the government of the day and work out a strategy globally. Where do we want to go? Where does India, for example, want to go? Where does Mauritius want to go? By virtue, they will know, because all these ideas come together, becomes a very, very powerful, a very powerful platform on which we can just, the sparks will arise. And this is the way we can then identify a strategy moving forward.
No, absolutely. And I think that brain circulation framing is very important because, growing up, I used to be one of those folks who would always look down upon the people who left India and be like, okay, this is brain drain for the country, etc. And then, later on, after also having been outside and met people who are doing well, I feel that people in the diaspora, and I can talk about India, but I see even for other countries, when they're outside, they still do a lot for their own country, and perhaps in many cases, a lot more than they would have done had they just stayed in. So I think the geographical boundary
This is
doesn't
where
matter.
kind of a reward, a reward, a recognition of sorts matters, because it really positions that person that, whatever the person has done, it positions that as a role model to be emulated. And this is how you make the young people dream, and they can afford to dream big, because they can see that it can say to myself, this person has done it, so why can't I do it? I should be able to do the same thing. And so this is what we have to instill in the young people's mind, this notion of hope, where there is a lot of hopelessness right now.
Absolutely tremendous hopelessness right now. And that brings me to my other question. And this is something that I've always wondered about. You have weighed in on this in other conversations. That's the whole notion of resource curse. Because when we look at countries like India or many countries in Africa, Kenya, Nigeria, or even in Latin America, there's a lot of resources. But despite those resources, somehow we've not been able to make the institutional strength to a level where, those resources, and since you were talking about human resources, I also feel that also somehow comes into this ambit of being in a resource curse, that countries with high resources still face coordination challenges and poverty. So just wondering if you've what's your latest thinking on the ways out of that?
But Arpit, if you allow me, Dr. Ameenah, before you come in, I'll give you the example on the resource curse. I'll give you the example of my own state where I work, where I've worked for 4 decades. It's Punjab, India. You refer to Green Revolution. The Green Revolution was started in this very state. We are 1.5% of the country, but we still supply about 40% of the food grains which are required for the nation. We are small, but we are big in terms of agriculture. But what's happening? Agriculture today is become a curse for us. We had good quality soil, we had good dynamic farmers, we had enough waters, we had enough information and knowledge and even technology. Our agriculture universities were doing so well that our productivity is comparable to the best in the world. Our production in terms of quantity and the quality is probably the best. Country still is dependent. They don't let us come out of wheat and paddy. But this kind of a resource which gave the food and food security to the nation has become a curse today. We are stagnating in agriculture. The way the agriculture is being done in Punjab, India is non-sustainable. The youth does not want to stay in agriculture anymore. Most of the youth is migrating to Canada, America, Europe, wherever they find a place. Unfortunately, as and when we try to modernize, transform agriculture, people resist it. And you saw that the agitation, year-long agitation we had when the new farm laws were introduced in 2019-20. And farmers resisted, and the agitation was all over the country. The fact is, the laws were very good. Laws were aimed at transformation of agriculture marketing, agriculture technology, agriculture input services. But because the farmers have gone into a kind of a shell where they feel more comfortable, they think everything is coming free and easy. All the input services are free. Input is available at subsidized price. Power is free. Electricity is free. The energy is coming in, flowing in. The groundwater is depleting. They are not bothered. The greenhouse gases emissions from agriculture is increasing. They are not bothered. Kind of inoptimal use of fertilizer and agrochemical is happening. They are not bothered. But they're getting enough money for survival. They don't want to do any more work. So this kind of a resource curse is clearly visible in Punjab, India. How do we get out of this? This seems to be
I'll juxtapose this. I'll juxtapose what's happening in Africa. Africa has poor people, but Africa is a rich continent. I'll just give one example, right? If you look at a country like DRC provides about 80% of the coltan which drives the mobile industry, the mobile phone industry. Coltan, the cobalt and tantalum together, that's what's needed. They all come out of DRC. Yet, I'll just put some figures to people to have an idea. The entire GDP of the African continent is around $3 to $4 trillion US. right? 3 to 4. The market capitalization of NVIDIA will require the metal coming from Africa, the rare metals, etc., etc. The market capitalization of NVIDIA, as we speak, is $5 trillion. One company against the rest. So where is the gap? What is happening? The gap is very, very simple. We talk about resource curves. We know that many banks operating out of London, out of Paris, out of New York, they need these resources as their collateral. So by any means, they will come and get it, right? And even if it causes instability, it causes killing, genocide, you name it, it's all there. So they need that as collateral for their. Now, some countries have resisted. The leaders have been killed, or whatever it is. All the problem we've seen, of course, in Central America, in South America, in Africa. But there will come a point where there will be a lot of resistance against this, and we are seeing already, we are living already in a world which is moving. Well, of course, the geotectonic plates are shifting very, very fast. We have seen what was the attempt of moving NATO east into Russia's. We know we can go back to the history of it, but I'm not going to. But I think most people are getting an idea as to what was behind this war in Ukraine. But it is essentially about getting the world resources as collateral for banks. Now, why can't the people in DRC make the best of their resources to improve livelihoods? We saw how Mossadegh in 1953 was overthrown because it nationalized the oil in Iran. I mean, there will come a point where this system will not be possible. You mentioned the case in Punjab with the agriculture, but it's happening in various forms across the world. So there has to be a change. Now, will the change happen naturally? I don't think so. The happen will through a war, probably, because at the end of the day, this is the finality. This is how. Yes, this is how the whole world has changed through wars.
But don't you think China is more aggressive in controlling and getting charge of resources in Africa in particular, and maybe many other countries? We see it happening in our neighboring country, Bangladesh, Nepal, Pakistan. Everywhere China wants kind of a control, some kind of a lever to control resources, and through resources they're exporting manpower to smaller countries, if not to some smaller African and Asian countries.
And just to add to that question, I always wonder that, okay, you're giving a lot of these examples of Iraq, etc., but how come GCC was not, it did not fall into resource curse when we look at Saudi or UAE? What did they do differently?
But are they really free? I think that the answer isn't the question.
That's true.
And the Chinese model, if you speak, I know there's a lot of narrative going around about the Chinese debt trap. Increasingly, it's been bandied around that China is doing that. Now, let's take, for example, the debt in Sri Lanka. They had said that it was because of port and all the rest of it. But when you actually break down the debt of Sri Lanka, you'll find that they owe about 10% to China. Where's the 90% going to? Bond market, a lot of these multilateral organizations, a lot of these private bodies that have been lending money. And in Africa, we witness the same thing. This is the issue we are grappling with, is debt repayment in Africa.
Yes.
Now, again, we come back to the issue of the issue of debt. Most of the economies in Africa, they're using the meager resources, because don't forget, we can't print money. We have to earn the dollars. We have to earn the euros. So whatever resources, the meager resources that we have to go and service debt. So now, why is this the case? After independence, a lot of these countries, the coffers were empty. So they had to look after education, all the pillars of the economy. So what do they have to do? They have to go to the market. And of course, what do? They have to borrow at very high prices. If you are going to buy a house, you get a loan, you get a mortgage, which is spread over 25 years, sometimes 30 years, and the rate of interest is about 2-3%. And African countries goes in the bond market, they get a loan for 10 years, and sometimes they have to pay up to 12% in terms of interest. So it's impossible. And then what they have to they have to service the debt, and then they have to take more money to actually service the various pillars of the economy, which means that these countries, they try not to default, and the default at national level, the default on education, the default on social services, but they don't default at the level of the creditors. But what happens is that you have all these rating agencies that still put these countries at risk. So it's a vicious circle. That's why I said all the organizations which actually lend money to Africa, the entire system is skewed against Africa. Now, we have seen all this war about tariff. Where is the WTO? It has been sidelined. I feel sorry for the people at the helm of the WTO because, what role do they have to play? They can't. They can't function. So the entire system is working against. That's why you see China. China hasn't been at war since 1979. They only had been at war for 1 month, and that was it. So they have used the resources to build the country. I've been to China recently. I can tell you, I was really, really surprised. It's like you're going to a different planet. The building, the cleanliness, the efficiency of the system, and all the rest of it. They have chosen a model. If you speak to the average Chinese, they will tell you that we have democracy. How do they have democracy? For example, they could not leave the country to go on holiday. Now, 149 million people leave China every year to go on holiday, and 149 people come back again to China. So they feel like this is democracy. They are freer. They are freer to wear colors. I mean, it may sound something very, very basic that they can eat the food they want. They can go to places. So to them, there is a modicum of democracy. It is not the democratic process as we have seen, has been prescribed to us by the Western institution, that is one country, one person, one vote, but it is a different form of democracy. The country academically, I can look at that now. They are the leader in terms of publication. How do they do it? They have taken 800 million people out of absolute poverty. And it's a fantastic leadership. Now, what is China doing with the rest of the world through the Belt and Road Initiative? Again, African countries are welcoming them because it's in dark contrast with the colonial power there before, where everything was extracted out. I mean, if you look at the development of the railway system in India, it wasn't built for the interests of the Indian. It was built to take out resources. So these are things that people, when they actually think, they look at all the processes and say, look, maybe we have something better to gain on the Chinese because they come and build things. They just don't extract and leave. They leave something behind. So it's all relative in terms of appreciation of what the Chinese are doing. Yes, of course, there will be resources, there will be extraction, there will be petty thieves who are going to go out there. There'll be, of course, sanction. But overall, the Chinese model of doing business with many African countries, many poorer countries, resonate with the people, that they feel that there is something they're getting out of it.
But do you think
partnership?
Let me just build on something that you've said in another interview I was reading, and that you just mentioned, that half of the continent of Africa now spends more on interest payments than on public health, and that by 2024, 11 countries in Africa were effectively shut out of the international capital markets. Now, my question is that this is similar to that sort of a prisoner's dilemma that we also see in environment, where the developed countries won't give the money. The developing countries would always say that we can't develop unless we get the money. And you're always in that constant trap. And if you simply look at the mantra that every country will act as per their incentives, you can extrapolate and see that the things are going to be as is. Status quo is going to be prevalent and things are going to go worse. So what do you think about that? Yeah.
Well, the thing is that the multilateral system has to be reformed, but there is no appetite to reform, be it at the level of the board of the World Bank, be it at the level of the board of the IMF, be it at the UN Security Council. I don't see why, for example, India doesn't have a seat at the UN Security Council.
Yeah.
If you go by the mantra, at least the theory at the time of the enactment of the United Nations, it tells you that by sheer virtue of numbers of population and per capita, etc., you should have replaced United Kingdom. It's not happening. And this is one of the reasons why probably the new development bank is getting traction in the East. The SCO getting traction. You're finding the BRICS rising. They're finding the BRICS being more assertive. Now the BRICS plus, they're becoming much more assertive. People are realizing that the resources are under our soil. The human resources are within us because 60% now of the BRICS, 60% of the world population live in the BRICS.
Yeah.
And the GDP is more than the G7. So
Indeed.
people are saying, what's going on here? We're not represented at the UN. So
Yeah.
what do we have to do? We can't change. There's no appetite to change. I mean, England and France together, two members of the UN Security Council, they have a joint population of 120 million.
Yeah.
Vis-a-vis a country like India with 1.5 and counting. So it is not possible. Brazil is not represented. So there is very much people are getting very upset about this. They don't feel represented. And they say, okay, in that case, we build another institution for ourselves, something that works.
So that's what's driving people to find new alternatives.
Exactly, new avenues. And I think I was in China in September when Prime Minister Modi went, I think after a long time, to Tianjin, precisely for the issue. And it really made a buzz because we were saying, wow, okay, we have two big giants in Asia coming together, and we have Brazil, we have all the rest. So it is creating this kind of a balance. And I think I can't help thinking of what Gramsci said, the new world, the old world is dying. The new world is struggling to be born. I don't think it is struggling to be born. It's there. We don't want to say it. Now is the time for monsters. So let us see how we can make these monsters work for the rest of us, because most of the people increasingly refer to us as a global south. I say, I'm sorry, it is not the global south, it's the global majority. We are 88% of the world population. We can't be referred to as a global south, a very derogatory way of addressing us. So global majority, 88% vis-a-vis the remaining 12%.
No, absolutely. And I'm just reflecting on, what you also said about the WTO, because the biggest casualty in whatever the trade wars have happened has been the WTO. And I feel that just the way that we've imagined these global institutions to be, like in the UN Security Council, I totally agree that you have to have a rotating sort of architecture to reflect the realities of the world. And similarly in WTO, I think one has to figure out another way which is more, in line with realism, and because countries are going to do what countries are going to do, and if an institution cannot coordinate between them, then it's the fault of the institutional design. It's not the country's fault. So
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So things are happening. Things are happening slowly. Of course, you can't move too fast because the system is still skewed against us. But slowly and surely, the things are going to happen at the international front.
Dr. Gurib-Fakim, over to you, sir. Over to you, Mr. Kumar. Yeah.
Dr. Ameenah, I'll take you back to your statement on China. I'm happy to know that people are more happy. I've been to China many times, and I do go there for my official engagements there. They may not believe in one person, one vote, but definitely there is more participatory governance. People, they focus more on the context, the local people, the local requirements, and they probably try and bring the nation and the state and people close to each other so that the nation grows while the people enjoy. Now, the fact is, in such a situation, when China has grown faster, China has achieved much more than even India could do or many other countries could do. In such a way, the role of the state is changing. How do you see the state should look like now? It's not that the traditional state, the Mai-Bap system, and the people are born leaders and they'll come and govern and they do what they like. It's not. You have to reflect on the local context. You have to reflect the people's aspirations. You have to see how the science and technology are changing. You have to reflect on the problems of climate. You have to reflect on the problems which are emerging, even in the new way of governance, in the new way of development. So China is something which has shown us the way that despite all the problems, despite the numbers of the people they have to feed and they have to support, they have grown and they've grown faster. So don't you think the state has to change, and state has to change for better, state has to transform itself? How do you see the role of state from now onwards?
We can have an outside-in view of China. Both yourself and myself, we can have, but I think we have to ask the Chinese. are they happy with their system? And I can tell you, it's a resounding yes. Because, if you look at the governance, I remember once a Chinese was saying to me, in China, nobody can become the head of the Communist Party and, of course, the head of state of China without having gone through the process, a village, a provincial, and it goes up like this. And you also have to convince the Communist Party, the CCP. And the CCP membership is over 100 million people. It's the population of England and France put together. All right. So you need to convince all this. They have their own governance system. And the general Chinese, they are happy with the way the system has operated for them. And that is something which is non-negligible. We can have our own opinion, but they seem to be happy. As I said, they feel they have the governance, they feel they have democracy, they feel they are happy, their livelihoods have changed. For a country where 50, 60 years ago, they couldn't afford a bowl of rice. Now the malls are full. And as you say, you've been to China. I was there last September. I see the progression the country has made. So I think if you speak to the average Chinese, they are happy with it. Now, whether this model can be reproduced to the rest of the world, I don't think so. Because the custom culture...
If I may interrupt you, some years back, let's say 72, 70, 75 to 1980, average Chinese were never said to be happy with the system, with the governance, with the growth, and whatever was happening to the citizens' lives, citizens' income levels, and whatever you call. The poverty levels were high. The restrictions on the individual or a personal freedom were much more than what you see today. This transformation from a average Chinese who said, we are not happy with the system. Now, average Chinese, as you are saying, I have also realized this, average Chinese now say that with the transformation from no, they say, yes, we are happy. The happiness index, the happiness conditions of the common citizen in China has changed. This transformation from no to yes is a big achievement for China. Probably the role transformation for the state. The whole system, maybe it's the same system, but the role of the state, Chinese have realized the role of state has changed. That change in the role, the transformation in the role of state, maybe in Europe, maybe in America, maybe in India, maybe elsewhere. We in Africa, more importantly, we need to kind of push for that change in the role of state. That is something where a lot of structural changes, structural transformations, structural reforms would be needed to bring the global order, to make the global order more equitable, more connected, more interdependent, and more caring for each other.
But this is again what I said earlier on. The global order in the West is more about plutocracy, nurturing a plutocracy, nurturing all these oligopolies. Very few people, in fact, I was speaking to some Chinese in September, and I said, how do you make the difference between, business people, for example, getting into politics? He said that the rules are clear. You either if you want to make money, you stay in the private sector. If you are a businessman who want to come into the politics, you can't do your business. So the demarcation is there. So you can't influence the policy, and the government is in charge of the policy, be it for health, be it for education, be it for anything else. If you want to make money, you go in the private sector, you make all the money, you pay your taxes, and that's how you should do it. So again, it's a governance system that has been developed by the Chinese people themselves to make it work for their own country. And so these are the fundamentals we have to address. And if you want the rule of law to be right across the country, again, we have to go back to basics. And basics is pay your taxes, pay your taxes, pay your taxes, so that the coffers of the state can. And of course, when the people get money from the social service, their livelihoods improve. One generation down the line, they'll be happy, because they've seen the transformation from their grandfathers, grandmothers, and where they have started and where they have landed. And now with the no restriction on child policy, I've seen Chinese people now with 3 or 4 kids. Again, they are very happy. So these are to them transformation which is happening because of the leadership vision, because of the leadership investing in the people. And there is a parallel, a nice parallel between what India and China have done, both in terms of traditional medicine. Both of your countries, they have added value to this knowledge. Africa hasn't done that. Now, if you go to India, you can get treated through Ayurveda. If you go to China, you can get treated at par with allopathic medicine, Chinese medicine. This is not the case in Africa. So again, it's a culture that has to be developed, a culture of self-appreciation, a culture of value addition to what your grandparents have given you, so that, it makes you proud to be who you are. And that's a very, very important thing. You see that whenever we hear the Vande Mataram singing, the pride in Indians. You see the Chinese, same thing, when the flag is going up in Tiananmen Square every day. You see the pride in the people because they know what they have done so far is worked hard, and now they can see the fruit of the labor, of course, being channeled now to the next generation, and they feel comfortable with that.
Dr. Gurib-Fakim, a couple of follow-ups over there. One is that when we talk about, as you also mentioned, that China has a model, not every country can replicate that model. And I also sometimes feel that many leaders in many countries are so desperate to sort of just copy-paste that sort of a model that, I personally am of the view that China may not, may be, a solid capitalistic country, but it's probably not a democracy. And, that's sort of a lot of times in the effort to replicate the Chinese model, democracy is a casualty over there. And you said about, for example, the West oligopolizing. I also feel that, China also works on a similar oligopoly sort of a model. So do you think that if we fast forward into the future, most of the countries would pick that lesson either from the West or from Russia or from China, that let's just oligopolize and let's have our own, we've seen that in the zaibatsus of Japan, etc. as well. Is that key to development there?
But before you say something, Dr. Ameenah, before you say something, I'd like to add and I'll tell you what happens in governments in particular in India, and particularly what civil servants talk about it. We in civil services believe that our system in India is more plural, more open, we are more democratic. Anybody can do anything. People have freedom of choice, freedom of everything. And though we may be slow in growing, in our growth rates maybe not as comparable with China, though we have numbers which are as comparable with China, but we are much better off when it comes to China. Is considered to be a closed society, a closed government, a tightly held government. As a result, someday the bubble will burst. This is a common discussion, common refrain in the civil services in particular, in the government sectors. But China is, you can't trust them in all their statistics, in the data, whether they are truthful about what their growth figures are, what their population figures are, what the literacy standards are. Maybe what you see in Beijing and Shanghai is not what's happening in the remotest corners whereas in India, the things are internet and technology and data science and the messages, proliferation of social media. It's all happening in all nook and corner. The most remote corner of the country has some kind of a bottled water, the packaged milk, and the telephony, the mobile telephony. This has reached. This may not, people say, I don't know, because I have not discussed this part with any Chinese friend and Chinese colleagues. But the fact is that we consider our system more open and more democratic, more liberal society than China. China is considered to be less plural, less open, and the people are more closed, more tightly controlled and regulated. What's your take on that?
And please add to the oligopoly question that I asked as well. So,
I just answered this one here. I've had the opportunity.
My apologies if you are being very aggressive to you. Sorry.
I've visited many cities in China. I've been all the way down to the southwest. I've been down south to Guangzhou, but the level of development is almost standard. This is the thing. It's not happening only in Beijing and in Shanghai. It's happening in Changsha, it's happening in Xining, it's happening in Wuhan, it's happening everywhere. So it's as if it's almost standard. Now, to come back to the question of the oligopolies, I think Korea gives you a very good example of how oligopolies have worked. They have a very famous system of the chaebols, for example.
Yes.
And Samsung, for example, is a chaebol. You have Huawei. All these are chaebols. So again, is the government giving them enough leeway to go and develop? But at the end of the day, they can pull back. And they can pull back when government feel that there is kind of drifting off somewhere in a space where they shouldn't be. So they bring back the regulations again. But it's a system again which cannot be reproduced maybe elsewhere. But we had in Mauritius developed something like this right at the earlier stage of immediately after independence, where we developed the free zone, right? It's like it's a mini country within the country. Give them enough leeway to develop. And then this was, of course, reproduced for several other sectors. So again, China is a system which we cannot reproduce across the world, that's for sure. But there are lessons to be learned from whatever they have done well. And it's these lessons that we can use in our countries. Again, people when in Mauritius say, "Oh, we want to be the Singapore of Indian Ocean." You can't become Singapore there because the conditions, the environment is not the same. But what we can draw from, for example, is a meritocratic process that Singapore may have, access to education, access to healthcare. And when you have these building blocks being put into the system, people feel comfortable. And if you ask anybody in Mauritius, what do they want? They want a little bit of money in the bank. They want to go to the food store and be able to eat properly. They want to be able to travel, and they just want a future for their kids. Now, if any government can provide for this, honestly, people simply will not care. And another country which has a good governance system, a bit like China, is Switzerland. People don't even know who the president is. They don't care because the system is inbuilt where they have accountability within the commune, within the region, and they just run away with their lives. And Switzerland, without the resource curse, they are one of the most innovative countries in the world. How did they do it? Investment in the people, investment in the institution. If you look at, for example, a country like Austria, they went the other way. They didn't invest in higher education, not many PhDs. They invested in the smaller part, in the lower rung of the ladder in terms of training, and they also did very well. Italy, family-oriented businesses, they did very well. So I think we cannot use a one-size-fits-all. We have to look at own strength, what we can do, what the resources are, but provided the leadership is sufficiently enlightened to say, okay, that's the legacy I want to leave for my people. And India is increasingly cited, for example, for the peaceful revolution you did to get the British out through Mahatma Gandhi, the March of Salt. In fact, our Independence Day, 12th of March, coincides precisely with that Salt March. So these are things that people emulate. They want to actually have something to look up to. And if they can do that and provide the basics, there'll be peace.
No, absolutely. And just, wondering, in Africa, what are some countries where you think that certain development models have worked well, and that's something that is unique to those countries, and maybe other African countries can look up to those models rather than it's almost like I feel like when you're growing up as a kid, people are always looking at each other that, okay, this person did very well in mathematics, this person did very well in sports, so let me try and become like this other person. But eventually you have to find your own talent to be able to grow into a developed human being. So that's what
long time.
Again, a related question. Dr. Ameenah, a related question. You see, it's commonly said, and you know it more because you've been teaching also and you've been in the university, that wherever there is a crisis, wherever there is a problem, the solutions emerge. Wherever there is an underdevelopment, the development models have to emerge. Why is it that these things are slower in Africa? Why is things are not moving faster? The new growth models, growth strategies, growth actions are not emerging as fast as they should emerge in China. You see, the crisis was there, whether we like it or not. And India, before 1992, there was a crisis when we were short of foreign exchange reserves, gold reserves were depleting, the poverty was rising, the inflation was high. The governments, whichever way they had to take, they took the path of reforms, and we did economic reforms, and we changed our course of action and our strategies and our growth approach. Likewise, many other countries have done it. Why is it these things are slower in Africa? Any great reason for that?
In Africa, we have to look at it from the lens of 60 years of post-independence history. That's one thing. I'm not being an apologist for where African countries are failing, but I think there is a big element of this, the short-term history that these countries have had. The second thing is that I have said earlier on, there is the resources, which of course being sought after by many other Western countries, Western corporate, where they feel entitled to say that these resources have to be on our collateral, on the banks.
Yeah.
The third one is that we were at some point a model to be emulated across Africa. Again, it's a model which cannot be emulated for the reason we have discussed. And there's one country which also had been a kind of a star for a while, has been Rwanda. Rwanda, after the genocide, 1994 genocide, when they emerged, a very strong leadership. Some people will call it autocratic, but again, this is something which we can debate on. So the president took hold of the country, and I'm not going to say that the gender issue mattered, but they had a very high percentage of women ministers. And women, they were, of course, closer to the people. They could relate to them. They helped to build the country. Then there was some flagship program that the president set up, and that was one cow per family, poor person getting the milk. And I remember once somebody was criticizing Mo Ibrahim, criticizing Paul Kagame, and Mo Ibrahim was listening to the conversation. And he said to the journalist who was interviewing, he said, when you have a family to feed, when you have kids who are going to be hungry, you have a cow, your president, your country is looking after you and provide you with a modicum of education. The country is looking after you. Democracy can wait. That's what he said, right? And so this is one thing that made people think that, okay, they are providing, so let them get on with it. So it became a star over the years. It gradually grew, and it's a country, again, not much resources, but now things are changing with the current political situation. But nonetheless, the country came out of the genocide well and developed the infrastructure, developed the institutions, and people were less hungry, and people were generally, again, so relative, they were relatively happy. So these are examples that we have. As I said, one of the main reasons why African countries cannot emerge, there's still a lot of interference in the running of the country's affairs. And because of the resources, there is entitlement to think that some of the banks feel that these have to be on their collateral, and they will not let go. And by this, we know all the problems that this causes, creating insecurity. And we see that happening right now in Sudan. We saw that happening. We see that happening in DRC, people living on $2 a day. And this is the same people who are digging out the coltan, which is feeding into Apple, which is feeding into NVIDIA, feeding into all these big corporates, and they don't see anything out of it. Some countries are getting to grips. Namibia is an example, for example, looking at all these issues and say, look, stop. We need people have to eat, and they have to see benefits from their own resources. So there are things happening, but we still have to look at it holistically. Again, I think something I will have to address. People say, oh, Africa is corrupt. Corruption is a two-way process. It's never one way. So wherever there's a corrupter, there's a corruptee. So who's corrupting? And also, what really annoys me, people say, oh, we're going to provide aid to Africa. Oh, come on. Aid to Africa? If you look at the model of the financing, for example, of the French CFA, it makes you wonder whether France is providing aid to Africa, or it's the money, their own money, which is providing, because the way the system was designed, I mean, how can you expect a country to deposit 80% of the reserve in a French bank and use only 20% to do the development? And when they need more money, they can only take out about 10% more. And then they have to pay the rent. They have to pay the interest on commercial basis, on commercial rates. This is impossible. So people are reacting. And this, of course, been going on for the past 70 years. It can't go on. It's not sustainable. So again, these are things. And if you look at, for example, the uranium in Niger, the uranium in Niger was being bought by France for 80 cents euro, 1 kilo. And the same price on the market is over $200 a kilo. So this is when people are saying, look, we need to get the best of our resources for the benefit of our own people. So things are happening. And of course, when things happen, when other countries which have been beneficiaries from your resources don't have it, then of course it creates a lot of tension.
But why do you think it can't be changed? It should be changed.
It is changing. It is slowly changing, but you will not see here that in the mainstream media because it doesn't fit the narrative.
I take your point. That itself is a big question. whether the
We
media is
mustn't forget that the media doesn't give you the
fair
news
to
as
all,
you
whether
should.
media is fair to all. While we
Yeah.
expect the
Exactly.
government to be fair to all, I think media has to be fair to all. Arpit?
Exactly.
Yeah. No, I think I'm just a couple of my thoughts is that first, the Rwandan example is very important to understand, and maybe at some point of time we should have people from Rwanda to talk to us on this podcast.
Yes.
Except we don't want the Indian or other politicians to take notes on the democracy bit. We need to preserve that. But no, I do agree with what you're saying, and every time I think that I'm actually also working on this book concept, which is about traps in society and traps in this world, where I compare the situation of being stuck as opposed to being trapped. Being stuck, you can put effort in a unilateral direction and come out of it. But if you're trapped, maybe effort is not gonna, it's like quicksand. If you're stuck in quicksand, if you put more effort, you would probably not easily come out of it. And you need some specific knowledge or some specific external help which would bring you out of it. And what you mentioned about France and some of the North African countries, and that sort of reminds me of this trap-like situation, which I often struggle to find how our country is coming out of it, because then it's simply about either about power or about finding alternatives or just living with it. So yeah.
Yeah, I think they recognize this. Africa is 1.4 billion, I think over 1.5 billion people.
Yeah, around
right?
India's population.
Around
Yeah.
1.5. So there is, if you look at this, is at par with the population in China, at par with population in India.
Yes.
And there has to be an intra-Africa, because we have a captive market of 1.5 billion people, right?
Yeah.
And by 2050, 1 in 4 working age adult will be African.
Yeah.
And by 2100, 1 in 2 working age adult will be African, right? So there is already a captive internal market within Africa. So they have enacted this free trade agreement, right? The Africa Free Trade Agreement, to ensure that, the exchanges are happening locally. I mean, I don't see why Kenya producing cassava, for example, cassava cannot be sold across to Tanzania. And also, why can't they use their own currency? Why do they have to go to, why do the exchange has to be done in New York?
Yeah.
And now what the Afrexim Bank has done, they have set up a system called PAPS, which of course means they can use their own currency to exchange, to do trade. So this is something which is happening. A lot of people now are in question, because if you look at the price of gold, right, and you know how much Africa sits on gold.
Oh yeah.
When US came out of the gold standard, $1 was about there was $34 to 1 ounce of gold, something like this. And now it's over $4,000, right? So people are increasingly saying, well, why can't we use this as collateral for our economies? Why can't we do that? Right? So the thought process is coming, but it's coming against, of course, where the global north is collapsing. The economies are not doing well at all. And then they're seeing these resources which are no longer available for them to exploit. Same thing what they saw in India a few decades ago, where they saw in India cheap source of, cheap resources, cheap manpower, and all the rest of it. We mustn't forget that when the British landed in India, India was contributing 23% to global GDP.
Yeah.
And by the time they left, it was only 2%.
Yeah.
So something happened. And the same thing is happening in Africa. They're looking at all these resources which are there, and they can't tap into it easily anymore. Although it's happening illegally, there's a lot of illicit flows which go out. If you look at the illicit flows, we should not be depending on aid at all. In fact, the aid's gone now with USAID gone.
Yeah.
But, in terms of illicit flows out of the continent, we are looking at billions of dollars lost every year. So these are issues of governance which have to be done, but it cannot be done just by one country. It has to be done at the level of the region, at the level of the continent, at the level of regional blocks which are being developing. So these are things which, of course, I think is work in progress.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And no, I hold one, semi-controversial opinion that needs probably more historical research, which is that I try not to be an apologist for my country, where I feel that, okay, I feel that we were colonized, but that cannot be
The
our
reason.
apology for everything. And I also feel that there must have been some cleavages within our country that were susceptible to be exploited. So it's not as if we were doing good and united and we could have been colonized. Must have been some lacking on our part as well, and which those things might still be lingering on, and we need to take a serious look at it. That's what I feel sometimes. So yeah.
The
No, no,
other way
you're
of saying
absolutely right.
it,
No, you're not being an
other way of
apologist.
saying is, Dr. Fakim, the other way of saying is that one should never be looking back. Past is never the reason not to grow in future. We should look at the present and grow in future. I think we had a very, very interesting conversation, Doctor. We talked about governance, we talked about diplomacy, we talked about policies and role of leadership, the changing role of state. But what would you like to say to the next generation policymakers?
And
What
also,
should
if
they
you
do?
have some comments on what I said, so both the things.
No, no,
What
no.
you think
Yeah, you're not, Arpit, you're not being an apologist. I think, these changes take time. It's generational issues because our grandmothers might have passed, but I'm sure people who have witnessed this right now, they can relate to this negativity which has emanated from the colonial era. I mean, the entire structure. I mean, I mentioned, for example, the railway sector, how it's built in India. But one thing that if we want to change, we should really have a good grasp of our history.
Yeah.
And it is not being taught by design. It is not being taught by design. And I feel that this is a big gap in our education system when we actually doctor the history as it has been lived. People need to know the good point, need to know the downside and the plus sides as well. But they need to know the history very much so that we don't repeat the same mistakes again.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we'll keep on bumbling along and
Keep
doing the same
on
mistake.
doing the same
So we
thing.
should,
And
so we should be who we are.
this is what I call
Sorry?
the role of history in policy making.
Yeah.
The history
Exactly.
has a
We
role
need
in
to have a
policy
good
making,
history.
and the policymakers should learn from the history, but not
Yes.
always blame the history of the past.
No. We shouldn't blame history, but we should be aware of where we
We
came
should be aware.
from.
Yes,
And
history
that's why
has
we
a
should
role
be
in
aware all
policy
the
making.
time.
Surely,
Yes,
surely.
absolutely. So increase the knowledge of history in our kids. And nowadays it's so easy, but you don't have TikTok in India. I know that. But there are other means of getting this message out. And what they have done with TikTok is that they have showed us the attention span of our kids, which is about 10 seconds.
Yeah.
So we can make this messaging 10-second long, but they need to be, being actually irrigated with this every day so that they know where the history comes from, what happened, and who are our heroes and who are our villains as well. They need to know both sides of the story in order to have a very balanced view of the future.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So just now circling back with Mr. Kumar's last question, which was what advice do you have for policymakers of the future? There are a bunch of them who would be listening to this conversation and would think about entering politics or policy making. What advice do you have for them?
I would advise people to join politics. It's a horrible world, especially women, because now with the era of AI, women get demonized very, very fast. What I would say to them is develop a very thick skin and get into that. Throw your hats in the fray, because we need enlightened people in this sphere. We need some technocrats there to be able to shape the discussion. Otherwise, we're going to be back again having this conversation 50 years down the line. So we need people, we need good people, we need talented people, and there's plenty of you in your 1.5 billion. So there's plenty of talents there. And of course, if you bring in the diaspora as well, huge talent. And you can change the narrative, but get the people to throw their hats into the political arena. We need talented people, we need technicians, we need technocrats to be there.
Absolutely. And with that, a big thank you from our side, Dr. Gurib-Fakim.
Thank you.
Such a pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you,
so much,
Dr.
Arpit. All the best.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Kumar.
We really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.